everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's AVST Live webinar. Today we're going to be talking about call completion. Before Neil Butler gets us going, I'm going to just give a couple of quick reminders. We mentioned in the email invite for this that we'll be giving away a couple of the Plantronics Backbeat Fit headphones. So look for an email from us later today if you're one of those lucky winners. And as always, we do make the slides available to you. You can get them. Oh, it looks like they're not in the handouts area. I will go ahead and do that as soon as Neil gets going if you want to download. And then I will also send them out in the follow-up email today, which you'll receive with the recording as well. So one last thing, you're welcome to type your questions in at any time during the presentation for Neil. We'll have those queued up for him. And we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So with that, I'll let Neil get going.
Thank you very much, Ann, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on our webinar about call completion. Ann and I were just talking, this is an interesting subject. It's actually fairly critical to what we're doing with our product today, but it's not an area that a lot of other people are focusing in. So it's a little difficult for us to catch everyone's attention. Hopefully today you'll see, though, I think it's worth you showing up here. We always do like to start with, although I know many of you have been on a lot of our webinars, for those of you that this might be your first time, you might wonder, well, who are you to talk about, things going on in the unified communications world? And we're a company that's actually been around here since the beginning, before the beginning actually, from unified communications point of view. We've been here 35 years, focusing on communications software, communication solutions. Started out pretty much as a voice messaging, a voicemail company. But over the years, we've grown that to include a lot of action handling kind of applications that do things with calls, besides just take messages. We are recognized as the leader in the messaging market, in the unified messaging market, but there's a lot of other things we do that I think the average enterprise customer would find pretty interesting and sometimes compelling. We started out selling small voicemail systems back when I first started with the company. We had a 4-port system, a 6-port system, and an 8-port system. And the sale of an 8-port system was a big event. And that was because the enterprise people back then had some pretty good representation out in the market with systems like VMX and Octel and Avaya shortly thereafter. So it was a difficult market for us to enter. But as we stayed with it and built our own base and learned more and more about the enterprise and what they needed, we've been able to grow our product until now we really are an enterprise product. And as I said, recognized as the leader in so many of these application categories. And we've spent probably the last 20 years focusing on enterprise communications. And we've been very lucky in that we had an architecture that let us basically bring different things to the market, all on this same platform. So everything we have actually can be deployed on a single server if that's how you would want to do it, although there's reasons not to do it that way. And while it started with messaging, answering phone calls, it didn't take us long to realize back in those days what would be so much better than taking a message would be completing that call the first time. So that got us into automated attendant and things like that. And our focus on call completion has been pretty solid throughout the years. And as unified communications opened up new markets and new capabilities by connecting things within the enterprise, the focus has been even stronger in the last few years. If you look at the world we play in, because we're not owned by anybody, we're not owned by a PBX vendor or a networking company, our target is the world. So you should basically, regardless of your environment, be able to deploy our solutions. We're not one of those companies that comes in and says, oh, for you to have unified communications, here's all the things you have to take out and upgrade. We'll work with everything you have out there today. But also be comfortable that as you grow, as you change some of those, maybe that legacy infrastructure out, we'll work with everything you're going to look at going to as well. And that's really our goal, is for the people selling our product to be able to knock on any door and just talk about everything that we do without any limitations. It's been interesting being in this market over the years. More and more people, have talked about how, voice isn't as important. There's all these new communications tools. First it was email, and now, of course, lots of people say email is not important because there's instant messaging. And while all that's true, there's all sorts of new communications technology. In the business world, if you look at what's really important, how business really happens, internally, we certainly communicate more with email. My boss is actually one door over from where I'm sitting, and I'm more likely to send him an email than I am to call him on the telephone. It works really, really well. Externally, however, probably my main tool the first time would be the phone for most people. And as long as people want to yell at other people, basically, the phone call will be there. It'll be important. And getting it connected quickly and efficiently will be important. And of course, if you can't connect it, then both taking a message effectively and giving the caller some information on what's going on, those will all be very important as well. So we really focus, as we talk to our enterprise customers, in improving their communications. And the first place that it should start is let's get more calls through. It's certainly true that we don't work the way we used to. Mobility and movement is such a big part of so many people's job. It used to be very easy. If you wanted to call somebody, you called them, the phone on their desk rang. They either answered it or they didn't. It's just not like that now. Throughout a given day, you're very likely to be in multiple environments, different physical locations, and be counting on different devices. And all of that change throughout the day means you're such a moving target that the call completion rate in your enterprise is probably much lower than you imagine. Last survey I saw said 17% of calls that hit an enterprise get connected to the right person first time around. So it's not a disaster. You can put them into voicemail and send, leave a message, and that works. But the additional latency and the delay in the process, and the lack of really effective work habits because you're not really connecting, they take a toll on the business. And of course, people haven't made it any easier because we just don't have one telephone number anymore. And I've sat in meetings before where people said, well, I pretty much have one phone number. Well, what else do you have? Well, I also have a mobile that I carry around and use. And I have a soft client on my mobile. And then how about for data communications? Oh, well, yeah, I use my mobile phone and my tablet. And then I also do email from home. And that's the problem. There's this wide range of devices that we use, and not all of them all the time. So you're not only a moving target, but you're shuffling out the tools you're using as you move around, which makes perfect sense. Your desk phone's a great tool. Your desk computer is a great tool when you're sitting at your desk. It's pretty hard to beat that. But as soon as you walk away, you might say, well, my mobile phone's my primary phone. But then you might also work from more than one office and have even more phones than that. So as soon as you have this multiplicity of devices and locations, it starts to get difficult to connect calls efficiently. So if you look at maybe the average business person, this would represent, they have a desk phone, a business number somewhere. They have a mobile number. They might actually have a personal mobile and a work mobile that they use somewhat interchangeably. On the mobile device, they might have a Skype for Business or another soft phone client. And on a tablet, they're certainly getting messages through email and probably instant messaging. They might also have a soft phone on that. This is pretty much my basic setup. I have additional devices I test, but this is sort of my working tool set. And which one I use has a lot to do with physically where I am. I'm at my desk or I'm away from my desk, but also the environment I'm in. What makes sense based on where I'm working. Now, getting calls to the people correctly really would be helped by knowing which phone, which device they're sitting in front of. And of course, we could have a wonderful app where users went in and updated their status throughout the day, telling us, what devices they were carrying, so we could get those calls to them. But we all know users just aren't going to do that. Users don't want to be involved in that. But fortunately, there's other information within the enterprise that can be used to increase the number of calls that get completed and dramatically increase those. And this context information basically exists in other applications that are more reliable, that do know a lot about the caller. So we've taken to developing what we call intelligent call routing, and that is call routing based on information that we get from somewhere other than the user. Not that we don't like those users, but we have learned we can't trust them. So one of the most basic things we do, which people are always amazed when they stop and think about this, is we actually have a schedule. Now this is just a picture of our user client web phone manager showing the schedule that this user has set up for themselves. Now think about a schedule. If you are at work, you probably have some pretty typical work hours, maybe we'll say 8 to 5. You probably also have a commute. Most of us, unfortunately, where you're driving home, let's say 5 to 6. And then depending on your job, some of you are probably actually willing to take calls at home, maybe from 7 to 9. At 9 o'clock, you're pretty much done. But if you have your system set up to send your calls to your mobile phone, and it doesn't have a schedule, at 10 o'clock at night when that customer calls, thinking they're going to leave you a voice message, your phone's going to ring. Most systems don't take that into consideration. Whatever you have set up works until you remember to turn it off. And turning off your mobile phone ringer is really not a good idea for all sorts of reasons. So the very basic thing we start with is a great internal schedule that can be set up to run automatically, but it also lets the user override it when they need to. That's really the kind of one of the core principles of our intelligent call routing is automate it as much as you can, but don't leave the user stranded. Give them the ability to change it when something changes in their day, as if that ever happens to us. The next big thing that gives us information that's fantastic for handling calls, of course, is the user's calendar. Users might not want to get into our app and say what phone they're using, but they will get into their calendar. Most of us live and die by our calendar. So knowing somebody's in a meeting not only changes how we're going to manage that call, but it gives us additional options in terms of how we're going to use different devices to manage that call when they're in a meeting. So that's the second thing we can do, is we can read a user's calendar, and based on that, we can do things. Now, the obvious thing to do is take a message. Hello, Neil Butler's in a meeting. He'll be back at 4 o'clock. Please leave a message. And that's what a lot of people do. But we'll see we have other options when you're in a meeting for kind of stronger options when you're in a meeting than just taking messages. Now, one of the things you really can't see on this screen is we actually have a plugin for Outlook where when you create a meeting, you can have a default meeting status that says take a message. But maybe this meeting is a half-day virtual trade show you're attending. So you're basically going to have your computer up and going all the time, and of course you're still working. And you want a different way of handling calls for that. So when you create that meeting, there's a little drop-down window that would let you create a different kind of availability, a different list of devices, a different way to handle calls for that one meeting that would override what was actually the normal calendar type setting. We do the same thing for instant messaging. We always think it's kind of amusing that these are called presence engines. They're sort of happy face, sad face presence engines, right? You're either there and you've touched your keyboard and mouse, or you haven't. Yes, you can put yourself in a busy status and a few things like that. But the truth is, they're really not that much about presence. We're going to extend that presence piece in a second here to go way beyond. But it's still nice to know that a user is at his desk, because we know he's touched his keyboard in the last few minutes. Or he's gone into Do Not Disturb, let's say in Skype, and we can have a different rule that says, well, if I'm in Do Not Disturb, send my call straight to voicemail. So we can actually track their link in Skype presence to change how we handle calls as well. Probably the most important piece, though, and kind of impressive piece, has to do with, we know when you're in different places, you use different devices. So wouldn't it be good to know where you were? Well, we don't have an app that knows where you are. If we built one of those, people would refuse to install it because nobody wants their boss to have a list of where they've been all day long. What we do have is an app that lets users define certain locations and then allow the system to handle calls differently when they are at those locations. So how this would work is I would take my mobile app, my CX mobile app, and I would say build an app, and let's call it at work. And it goes out to the cell towers and triangulates, brings back latitude and longitude information, and it now has that defined. Now I can have a rule in my system that says, if he's at work, and to find out, let's ping his mobile device and ask, are you at work? No, I'm not. Okay, let's move on to the next rule. Maybe send it to my mobile phone instead of my desk phone. I can then build a location for my home office if I work there, or for two offices. I have two different business offices I work out of. I can do that. So I can build these locations, and the rules can now take advantage of the location. That means things like when I'm driving to work, the system can know to send my calls straight to my mobile phone. But when I walk into the building, they'll start sending them to my desk phone. it's a fairly impressive increase in productivity just from knowing which device to use. Even if you only have your desk phone and your mobile phone, just calling that correctly is incredible. Yes, there are plenty of devices that will ring them all at once. And you can have 2 or 3 phones ring at once when everybody's looking for you. That's really a waste of money. You have to equip your system with more trunks than you need, more ports than you need. It makes much more sense to know where that user is and then have a specific list of devices that we can use based on that location. So if you look at things like the calendars and you look at instant messaging in Skype for Business, those settings are going to be always correct, or let's not say always correct. Let's say the user's maintaining or doing whatever they do with those automatically. Certainly the calendar, we know, we keep pretty accurate, and by being able to use that, we get to make good choices. But also the statuses that we can use. If you're somebody that works on projects and really does want to block things, so you block your do not disturb on your Skype, that would automatically block your calls if that's what you wanted. And every one of those statuses you see there can have a different rule associated with it. Now, all these rules get built up front. The user really never knows that much about them because from a user's point of view, it's a much simpler system than it is from the engineer's point of view. So a caller comes in, your schedule is the first thing it hits to see whether you're taking calls at all. And by the way, your schedule has overrides as well. And then it goes to the call routing engine that uses all these pieces of context, your location, the schedule, your programmed work hours, your calendar, your status. And based on those, it sends the call to what's called an availability list, which is just a telephone number list. So when I'm at my desk, bring my desk phone first and then my mobile. When my status is mobile, send it straight to my mobile phone. When I'm in a meeting, use mobile notify, which we'll look at a second here. When I'm at home, I use a soft phone mostly. So if I'm at my desk, go ahead and send it to maybe my Skype soft phone, and then if not, overflow to my mobile phone. If I have set something as away from desk, deliberately send the call straight to voicemail. And then in my case, I actually have a setting called Starbucks, because I spend 2 or 3 hours at least a week down the street in the local Starbucks reading technical documents to try and keep up with everything. And I have a soft phone, and I have my client, and I can actually sit there. Obviously, I have a headset on because I'm listening to music, and I can actually sit there and be working and take my calls there. And I've created that location the same way with my mobile client by defining it so it knows when I'm in that Starbucks. Now you begin to see why we don't actually want to give a list of where we are to our bosses with this app. But it makes it very, very easy. So there are automatic overrides that change your schedule. The presence, the calendar, your location, they will determine where your calls go, and they happen automatically. At the same time, there are manual overrides. So I'm scheduled for this webinar from 10 to 10:45. That gives us enough time generally for all the questions and everything else. And I could, if there were no questions at all and I finished early, basically the system would think I'm still in the meeting. I don't really want to go in and change the meeting time. So I have this 15-minute gap. Now I could just take advantage of it and no calls will come to me. That would be nice. But more than likely I will go in and put a manual override and say, no, I'm already back at my desk. And I can do that by calling in over the phone and saying, change my availability to at my desk. Or I can go into my web phone manager, my web client that the users have, or my mobile client, and I can put those overrides in. So now what we've ended up with is a system that basically is about as perfect as you can get to complete calls. The amount of call completion gain you're going to see on this is really, really noticeable. And it does not require the user to have hardly any involvement at all. We give the user tools so they can control it, but most users, frankly, once it's in place, they just live with it. But just something simple like it goes to your mobile phone when you're out of the office, and it goes to your desk phone when you're in the office, and after that scheduled amount of time, it doesn't ring, it goes straight to voicemail. Just something like that puts you a world ahead of what you have right now. The mobile client we use is kind of an interesting client. It's a sort of a two-level client. The standard client is available to any user on CX. There's no licensing for it. You simply go out to iTunes or Google Play and download it. And the standard client does a lot of things. And if you kind of look at the difference between the standard client and the client when it is licensed, What you get on the standard client is the availability for the user to maintain all of their mailbox settings, which is very, very nice. You don't have to remember all the DTMF keys to go in and change your greeting and change your distribution list and do all of that. And then it also gives you secure messaging, which we'll look at in a few slides down, which is voicemail in a very secure way on your mobile phone. When you add the license, the personal assistant license to the user, that's what fleshes out the rest of the functionality on the mobile phone, including some call screening we're going to look at, this whole availability piece that we talked about, and the use of your contacts. And the contact use is really incredible. You don't just get it on the mobile phone. When you have the personal assistant license, your contacts are now available, so you can make calls to them, you can send messages directly to them, you can include them in invitations to meetings when you're making the meetings over the phone. So it really widens that kind of user base from those in your company to those in your company plus your contact. Probably the best reason to add a personal assistant license with the availability functionality is for people who spend a lot of time in meetings. I said earlier, you certainly can send a voicemail, go to voicemail every time I'm in a meeting. But today, what most of us do, whether it's socially acceptable or not, is we bring our devices into our meetings with us, and we triage email. We all know there's things I'm involved with today that if I get this certain email, I might just have to step out of this meeting. So email is great because it's quiet. So I don't have to say, hold on everyone while I read my new email. But having phone calls screened, if you're going to say, okay, let me answer this and see who it is, you have two problems. One, you've interrupted the meeting, which no one's going to be happy with. And secondly, you really can't tell the person, oh, Mark, it's you. What we're doing isn't important enough, so you'll have to call me back later. You really are committed once you answer the call. What we add with our mobile app is a silent call screening that lets you triage calls when you're in meetings just like you do email. So when a call comes in, you'll get a pop-up on your mobile device. If it's from a contact or another person on the system, it'll say who it is. Now you have a pretty good idea how you want to handle this call. You certainly can say accept call, step out into the hall perhaps, take that call. That's a fantastic way to do that. Only those things that should interrupt you will interrupt you. Or you can look at that same information and say, yeah, I don't need to talk to this person. If you hit reject, it simply goes to voicemail. The user has no idea other than it rang a couple of times and it went to voicemail. But if you hit the options key, it starts to get a little more impressive. There's a record acknowledgement option. If I hit that, a little recorder bar pops up, and I can hit a button and say, listen, Mark, I know this call's from you, and I'm in a meeting. I'm going to be about probably 40 minutes, and we do need to talk, so I'll call you as soon as I get out. And you go back to your meeting. Now, in a meeting, maybe that's even too much of an interruption, so you could hit the select acknowledgement, and then you get the screen on the far right with pre-recorded announcements for the callers. You hit the will call in 15 minutes, and the caller will hear, Neil Butler was unable to take your call, but we'll call you back in 15 minutes. So you can actually have a full silent triage, including sending personal messages to the callers. The other choices on that middle screen, transfer to device. I can actually, maybe I'm answering this call walking down the hall after I came back from lunch. I really don't want to answer that call and sit in my room with my mobile phone up to my ear, for 15 minutes. I hit transfer to device. I select my extension. I hang up. By the time I walk into my office, my phone is ringing. Fixed mobile convergence is what that's generally called. I might look at that caller and say, oh, I'm going to be in a meeting a long time, but Jack can help this guy. So you could transfer it to Jack, still without answering the call, still without interrupting the meeting. And you also, if you knew who was calling, you could hit accept and record, and it would record that conversation as a message in your mailbox. So powerful tools for call screening. We do these same tools with call screening from the phone connection. So if you happen to be driving in your car and you answer the phone and it says, you have a call from John Smith, it'll then say, please say accept, reject, acknowledge, or transfer. So it will actually give you the same kind of processing commands from the telephone interface if you're operating in a hands-free mode. So very powerful tools that make, that old adage of, what's more important, the call coming in or the work you're currently doing. And you don't know that until you answer the call, which basically makes it a non-event because you have to take that call. This way gives you more control over your telephone life, so to speak. And then, of course, automated attendant is a part of call completion, and people always go, yeah, we're doing that with, we have that. We're doing vector tables in our switch, something like that. Well, that's a good start, but we go much further than that. First of all the legacy features you might be using today, we certainly have in our system. We've never taken a feature out since we started in 1985. But we have also speech-enabled the entire system, not just the names directory, but everything. So you actually now can have a very user-friendly menu that does everything. Transfers to people, transfers to department, play certain kinds of information back to the caller, all of that. And what we learned very early on is automated attendant gets much more complicated in a large multi-site enterprise because they have different locations, different sites. They might be in different cities. They might want directories to be different. In other words, when I hit this particular number and somebody uses a directory and says John Smith, I only want to look at the John Smiths that work at this location. So departmental directories. Also, disambiguation in a speech directory. I have 5 John Smiths. I need a way to talk the caller through that. Or I have a John Smith who is also Dr. John Smith, Dr. Johnny Smith. I need multiple alias names. All of that is a part of our front-end call processing as well. So everything we can do to make those incoming calls successful the first time is what we sort of lump into this call completion package. Now, that being said, we still do take messages, and before we take a message even, there's one other thing we do, and that is we give information to callers. So you've all called somebody, heard it ring 3 times, and then heard, hi, this is Neil, leave a message at the tone, I'll get back to you as soon as I can, which means absolutely nothing, right? I mean, you're pretty sure that's a greeting that got recorded when they put the system in 5 years ago. But by using context, if we can't use context to complete the call, we can at least give the caller better information. So when you go to leave a message instead, you'd hear, I'm sorry, Neil Butler is unavailable. He's in a meeting. He won't be available until 2 p.m. Or he's working from home. Or there's these various status greetings that can be programmed. So better information to the caller to ease the pain of them not getting through to you the first time. But when the time comes to take a message, well, we do that better than anyone else. We've been doing it longer than anyone else. Our product's the most mature product on the market by far. We were very lucky that we started at a time when open software and industry standard hardware were just becoming available, and that's how we started. So we've never had to sunset a product. And we have all the tools for voice messaging that anyone could possibly want. Probably the most current area of interest in messaging is where those messages go. Where are you going to put your voicemail messages? And unified messaging is all about where we can put it and all the groups we have to satisfy. And this isn't just the users and the managers and the IT people. This is the corporate compliance officers and the legal department and people like that. So we have spent time in the last 2 or 3 years making sure we have the best secure voicemail possible. And we'll look a little bit about where we store messages on the next slide, but the message life for us is a secure life. Now, I want to point out the very small print that they put down here at the bottom. Encrypted messages at rest is in our next software release. It's in 9.0. All the other things we're talking about going forward are around and have been around for years. But the encryption, people are actually now saying, no, they have to be encrypted when they're stored. Even though they're on your server, which is secure, and it's in our IT room, which is secure, we want those messages. So we're doing that. What we've already done is made it so if you want to encrypt them on the wire, both internally, inside between the phone system and us, using TLS, or externally, using SSL, or using secure SIP, secure SMTP, anything you want to put on the wire, we support. And the most important piece is the actual client piece. That's really where messages lose their security. No matter how good an IT department does at getting everything locked down, if you put down your iPad and walk away at Starbucks and somebody picks it up, they can certainly play those messages. Now, yes, eventually they'll know to wipe them and things like that. But we have a different approach with that. On our mobile client, we actually don't store the messages. You can see the messages in a list, and you can play that message, and we'll download it and play it and then delete it. So if you walk away from your device, our screens time out, and unless they know your password, they're not going to be able to get to those messages. Our web client does the same type of thing. It actually streams them and encrypts them. And we can set up so that if you're storing your messages in email, we can make it such that any message that's marked as private, if you don't do anything else with our system and you just let it go into voicemail or into email, email will recognize the private flag and then promptly let anybody forward that message anywhere they want. The concept of a private message doesn't really mean anything in email. What we can do instead is say if you get a private message, we'll send you a message into email telling you you have a private message, but you will have to call into the telephone to get that message. And then when we look at unified messaging, the story here really is, where do you want to store your messages? If you store them in your email system, you get a lot of flexibility. You get them from your web client, they're pushed to your mobile device. You get a lot, but for some people, there's risk. There's some laws like HIPAA that kind of make it difficult to justify putting a message for somebody that has confidential patient information in their mailbox and letting that go into email. So that's why we have our secure messaging option. We still do the full gamut of unified messaging, including storing everything in the email server, and that's both premise-based and cloud. We don't really care. That slide back from before, we can pretty much reach out and touch everything that you're using, make all this work together. But we also give you the options of keeping them secure. And this can be a user-by-user option. So in a healthcare environment, the IT department and levels of management, they might all want their messages stored in Office 365 or Gmail, whereas the people that are working at the nurses' desks and in the lab, they really can't have their messages stored there. So that flexibility is a part of this. So the whole story for us is, let's complete that call with ways that other people just haven't thought of yet, but we know are very successful, increasing call completion and all the benefits that brings. And then if we can't, let's do the best job of letting you flexibly decide how you want to do messaging. And now we're ready for questions.
Okay, thanks so much, Neil. There are a couple of questions already in the queue. If you have a question you want to put through and you haven't submitted it yet, use the orange arrow in the upper right corner to expand, and you should see the question box, as well as the handouts area is at the bottom, and the slides are there now if you want to download those. First question, Neil, how do you retrain users not to give out their cell numbers?
Yeah, it is a difficult one. There are some real advantages in having the calls come through our system before. In other words, not having them go directly to the cell numbers. And the only thing you can really do is kind of figure out what it is that they want in a communication system and make sure they understand linking that. There's a long history of people giving out their mobile numbers. And honestly, it's maybe more of a problem to the corporation when they give out their cell numbers than it is to the user. Because what happens if that employee leaves the company, they've got a pretty good list of people who are going to be still calling them for a while. And it is an issue, but I personally don't know how to do it other than just, find out what the sweet spot is, what we can do that they really would want to have happen, like the schedule. That's a really nice piece. The fact that, if you give that person your cell phone number and, the night that your new software goes in, that angry customer calls you, at 11 o'clock at night, that won't happen if you have it coming through the control system.
Okay. Next question. Does the visual call screening pose a delay to the caller? Can they still press 0 to get to someone else?
Yes, there's a couple of different ways you set it up. The visual call screening, the way this works, there's a funny thing about mobile phones. Mobile phones have an IP address, just like your computer does, only nobody gets to know what it is. So I can't write a software program that reaches out and touches your mobile phone directly, because even if you looked at it and told me what it was, it changes as you go tower to tower and zone to zone sometimes. So the first thing we need to do with that kind of push is use the push notification services that the vendor has. So both Google and Apple have a service where when I have a call for you, I actually send an email to them. And I say, could you please pass this message on? And the little tiny message packet, and they do, and that's, you get the little pop-up like you see on your phone, and our application is identified, so that triggers our app, and now our app sends the IP address that you're using currently back to us, and we can go. Those pushes are pretty quick, but I've seen delays of 30 seconds. It's going to have a little bit to do with the time of day and maybe where you're located, but there will be some slight delay for that. That is definitely true.
Next question: do some of the features come with the standard voicemail user license?
So most of what we've talked about today comes with the personal assistant license. The ability to have the call routing based on to different device lists based on contacts, that's all part of the personal assistant license. The front-end automated attendant is, that's a standard feature, although we did talk about speech, which is also an optional feature.
Okay. All right. Thanks again, Neil. I'm just doing a quick scroll, and it looks like that's all the questions. There is one more question here that just asked about the recording. And so, yes, there will be a follow-up email later today, which will include the link to the recording of this, as well as a place to download the slides. And in addition, I'll include a link to some of our other upcoming webinars if you're interested in joining us again in the next few weeks. So just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us, and I'll let Neil wrap it up as well.
Thank you, Ann, and thanks everybody for coming. It's difficult to carve time out of your day, and we understand that. Hopefully you find them worth it. We do notice a lot of repeat offenders who show up, for a lot of our webinars, so hopefully that means they're getting something valuable from them. If you're not, then rather than just write us off your list, why don't you send us an email? And if you send us an email to info@avst.com, tell us what you would like to see in a webinar. Tell us you'd like them longer and more technical, or shorter and more sales focused, or whatever you'd like, because we do definitely build this program around the needs of the people that are attending. So thanks everybody. Have a good week.
All right. Bye-bye.
To learn more about AVST, please visit www.avst.com.